In this module, we'll talk briefly about how to begin mapping an argument. So how to locate the contention and identify some of the sub-arguments, look at the ways that the author attempts to meet objections, etc. So we're going to look at a fictional case, and this is a made-up editorial in the made-up newspaper, the Happyland Herald Tribune, and happen to know the author of this editorial very well, and I know what he had in mind when he produced it. So its main contention is well known to me. So let's take a look. So we're going to begin classically in these editorials. You'll have this kind of fluff introduction, maybe setting an emotional tone, and I'm exaggerating features of the editorial, but you'll find when we look at the real cases in, for example, the New York Times, when I ask you to look at some of those examples, you'll find some of these characteristics, except not in such exaggerated fashion. But it's good to see an extreme case. So we begin with a set of appeals to emotions in the first paragraph, and it's going to set the stage for or at least set the emotional stage to get you in the mood to accept the argument and the main contention of the piece. So the title, of course, is going to make a number of points that, so for example, the insult to this person, the madman of fantasy. And I hope you've read this already, but we'll go through it. You could pause if you haven't read it already. Maybe this is a good time to pause the video and read the piece. Blow this up to full screen because the text is small. Quickly read the piece. Start outlining, as you do so, start outlining what you think is actually genuinely relevant to the argument. So read it through once, find the main contention, then locate those aspects of the text that are relevant to the argument for the main contention, and once you've done that, then resume the video. Okay, so I hope you've had a chance to read the argument for yourself, and that you have some sense for the main contention. So really the author of the argument is presenting an argument for a free trade agreement with the other country, Resourcia. And so we'll talk about the details of the argument and some of the sub-arguments involved. But to begin with, the first thing to notice is that when we're looking at these kinds of editorials, there will be a lot of beating around the bush, a lot of stage setting, a lot of emotional manipulation from the get-go. So what's the emotional manipulation here? Well, it's the discussion of the war against the gnomes that the people of Happyland have been fighting. These are costly and damaging conflicts. And then usually you'll find some sort of distracting self-praise. We are so great. We fought in defense of our principles. This is a land of liberty, etc., etc. Now, notice then how much of this plays into or fails to play into the actual argument. So let's take a look then at the actual argument structure. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so why should we support the main contention? So I hope that you've recognized that the main contention of the article or of the editorial is that we should, or Happyland, should sign a free trade agreement with Resourcia. And once we start engaging in the argument mapping, we're going to be able to determine, what are the reasons given and what are some of the objections dealt with, etc. So just given what we have here, we're going to find, okay, so how do we do this? Well, we can say, well, once we've identified the main contention, we can begin asking, well, why should we believe this? Why should we accept the main contention according to the author? Well, according to the author, we should accept the main contention. Notice that um, there's an awful lot going on here that's not directly relevant to the main contention. You could be distracted, for example, by the discussion of Zebedee fancy perm. So when we say, for example, that the governor shouldn't get involved with debates about free trade, it's a federal, not a state matter, etc., and the insults to Governor Fancy Perm, these are all distractions really from the argument for the main contention. The main contention is that there should be a free trade agreement with Resorcia. So let's take a look at the argument structure here. You could end up seeing, let's see, so there are some parts of the supporting argument that are included in the second paragraph, and then the main business, the main argument will happen somewhere in here. So let's see. Of course, there's a supporting argument for it back here, and we'll begin to unpack this as we map the argument out. So what's being said here? Well, economists all agree that the proposed free trade agreement will remove artificial trade barriers, leading to greater economic efficiency. Now, that does tend to be a view of all economists. So all economists do tend to accept the idea that removing artificial trade barriers leads to greater economic efficiency, and increases in trade will follow. There will be significant growth in the economy of Happyland. So presumably we're speaking here to Happylanders, and this should be a reason for them to go forward. So let's talk about the specific case. Because of taxes on imports of cotton from Resorcia, we live with a ridiculous circumstance wherein the farmers of Happyland irrigate their cotton fields with our precious and limited water supply in order to bring artificially expensive cotton to market. So there's an abundance of cheap cotton in Resorcia, even though some of Happyland's farmers will suffer in the short term, the vast majority of Happyland citizens will benefit from access to cheap cotton. So let's remember all of those who died in the war against the gnomes, and let's not pay attention to the madman in Fantasy. So the madman in Fantasy is arguing that no, we shouldn't have free trade. We should establish a stronger or stricter border. We should protect the cotton growers of Happyland. So let's take a look at the argument structure for this. Okay, so here's the general structure. The main contention being that Happyland should sign a free trade agreement with Resorcia. As we begin to examine the argument structure, it helps to just ask why. So to start asking why questions. So why should I accept the view that we should have a free trade agreement with Resorcia? And there are three basic lines of reasoning in the editorial. The first is that, look, I mean, we've been through a war. If we're engaged in productive trade with one another, we're less likely to go to war. And there's no supporting evidence given for that claim. So it's given as a reason. There's no additional argument, as far as I recall, given in support of that. And that appears somewhere, I think, in the second paragraph. The other reason that appears in the second paragraph is just this assertion that we have the right to trade with whomever we want, and national governments shouldn't stand in the way of our trading with whomever we want. This is just asserted again. This isn't developed. No objections to this are considered. There are obvious objections to a claim like this. You don't have the right to trade with whomever you want for all kinds of reasons, and there might be very strong objections to that claim. The author of the editorial did not consider any such objections. Okay, so the most developed argument in favor of the free trade agreement is the green argument given here. What are we saying? We're saying that there will be enormous economic benefits for Happyland if we undertake this agreement. And there is one objection to that argument, sub-argument given. So remember, the purple, the red, and the green are sort of like sub-argument. Well, only really the green one is. The other two are just assertions or reasons in support of the main contention. The green argument here is sort of a sub-argument. So in the sub-argument, the contention is that free trade agreements will provide economic benefits, and there are reasons given for that. So this is the most developed part of the argument, the most properly articulated. Over here, the objection that's dealt with is, well, or the objection that's considered is that it'll harm the cotton farmers of Happyland if we're to lift tariffs on imported cotton. And there's a response to this. And the response is, true, it might be the case that cotton farmers in Happyland will suffer. Nevertheless, the vast majority of Happylanders will benefit from access to cheap imported cotton, and that benefit then outweighs any harm to the unfortunate domestic farmers. Okay, so that's the attempt to tackle the one objection that's considered, and it seems like a plausible response. There might be other, you might add to that response, or you might strengthen the objection. We'll leave it at that. So, okay, so the trade deal will provide economic benefits for Happyland. We might say why. I think it's always good to say why. Well, why? Well, because there'll be increased trade between Happyland and Resourcia. But why will that cause economic benefits, just having increased trade? The answer is, well, why? Because the reason is because removing trade barriers encourages economic activity. And we might say, well, why is that the case? And then the response would be, well, markets will force each country to specialize in the goods and services that those countries can themselves most efficiently produce. So it encourages specialization, market specialization. Now, whether that's true or false, we'll leave it at that. That's the only point here is to lay out the total structure of the given argument. Once you have this in place, you can begin treating the argument critically. So you could challenge steps in the argument, or you could challenge the way the proponent of the argument deals with objections. You could raise your own objections, of course, etc. So, okay, so that's all we're going to do for this example. We'll maybe take a look at some of the real cases, the New York Times cases, as we go forward. So, okay, thanks.